Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Xiaolin Li, Chief Development Officer of Nannocare. And today's topic for the top podcast is how the current supply chain challenges provide lots of great opportunities for the startups. Xiaolin, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody.
So, let's take a look. We've heard a lot in the news related to supply chain challenges, and that's impacting everyone from large enterprises down to startups. And one of the chief areas of blame has been COVID. But do you think there are other areas related to supply chain where constraints have occurred recently that have caused additional challenges for the supply chain?
Yes, I think that COVID is more of like it's like just a clue. Like there are a lot of potential problem that is already been there even before COVID. It
Hmm.
just didn't get a chance to be exposed. So COVID is like a thing that like string that pulls everything that's already lying there out basically. People starting to think about, what do they want in life? Is it just work? They want more time with their families. They want more different things in their life. So that pulls out, the great resignation,
Hmm.
the great reshuffle that we're
Hmm.
talking right now. And that, of course, potentially leads to the the demands of other products, and then less work staff at
Hmm.
the in any other companies as well, because in supply chain there's so many people involved,
Hmm.
right? Selling, like people selling in the front end is just like a completely different area. The factory, the manufacturers, they have so many people working apart from the machines, but after that you still need people to maybe put products in packaging
Hmm.
and then have them delivered, count out, and then truckers driving around and all of those. So the decrease of them, of course, leads to that problem, and then also over consuming that
Hmm.
has way before COVID. Like COVID, I remember brands in Black Friday specifically sending out emails when everybody else was sending out emails about Black Friday deals and everything.
Hmm.
A couple brands doing it as almost like a tactic that is
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, we are not participating this because we don't want to encourage the over consuming." So it's all of these problems that has already been there before COVID.
It's interesting because you kind of hit on two ends of the spectrum. One, of course, is how supply chain is very labor intensive, and we still haven't addressed that. But on the other hand, it's about overconsumption, right? And sustainability, which is increasingly a hot topic. What,
Yeah.
you know, I think we could focus on either end of the spectrum, but looking at labor, do you think that from a logistics and supply side perspective, that startups have an opportunity to disrupt, I guess, the labor resources that are used in the supply chain? Because it's so labor dependent at this moment. You said everything from truckers to warehouse people, etc.
Yeah, it is. I mean, as we all know that we are very heavily relying on a specific region when
Hmm.
manufacturer, right? China, Southeast Asia, and all of those places. And there are so many potential problems that has already been here and now becoming more and more obvious, like political issues and
Hmm.
so I know that a lot of actually a lot of brands, sorry, has been looking for other sources of suppliers,
Hmm.
even before COVID, but a lot of them were not able to actually do it because, the culture difference.
Hmm.
Uh, as I think we've talked about this before as well, is that there's this documentary in Netflix that is called American Factory,
Yep.
and it's very, very true because when I was in China, um, because I came to America like 7, 8 years ago, so
Hmm.
before working in China. So now I am a product developer and working on the brand side, but I used to work on the manufacturer side,
Hmm.
which I help, you know, brands out of China to
Hmm.
source their supplier.
Hmm.
So what the factories are doing and then what are they looking for, and then they actually, the culture there is that people enjoy working there. They
Hmm.
like simple job. And
Hmm.
then of course, if you watch the documentary, I really resonate with it because
Hmm.
you will see at the end of the year, right before Chinese New Year, they will have uh people met each other in the factory and they get
Hmm.
married, and then
Hmm.
there's couples in the factories because that's all of their lives is about.
Hmm.
And I've did a lots of factory visits, is
Hmm.
that people actually live right next to the factory. So like there will be dorm rooms and cafeterias, and you don't ever leave work, basically. It's kind
Hmm.
of like Facebook or Google, but in the less fun way. It's like you so when we look at how much money they make, we're like, oh, the labor is so cheap and you only pay them, so little amount. The thing is, though, they don't pay rent and they
Hmm.
don't pay food, because the employer will also give them a like apartment buildings,
Yeah.
which they assign you. And then there are of course there are cheaper ones like bunk beds or stuff, but then if you got married with somebody that also works in the factory, you get your own units. And
Hmm.
then you have kids and they even have weddings, together at the end of the year. So it's very different, and then they don't take as many vacations like we do here. So like for example, uh, we will have 4th of July and then all of
Hmm.
those. In China, they're very far away from their families. So a
Hmm.
lot actually migrated from like smaller, you know suburban area that to the city. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of traveling for them to go back and forth if they have a lot of holidays
Hmm.
during the year. So what they do is they don't actually do any much holidays apart from the weekends,
Hmm.
and instead they will have a really long holiday during the Chinese New Year, and
Hmm.
some have even a month and a half. The longest I've heard of is like 6 weeks
Hmm.
of holidays, so that they will take long hours of flights and or train to go back to their family, and then spend a whole month and a half with them, something like
Hmm.
that. That's also why now we know that Chinese New Year's coming in
Hmm.
a week. So all of the costs of the ocean freight and everything is really really expensive, because people
Mm.
are trying to get you know the products before the Chinese New Year, because after that you will have to wait another 2-3 months.
Yep. I think working in a global environment, you definitely know that at least for, Western nations like the United States, even Canada, and even Europe, that December, early January is kind of like, don't bother doing anything, don't make any major decisions, and
Yeah.
then to your point, Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year is also a big, not going to get everything done if you have important linkages back to Asia. I think your statement is kind of interesting because it's so prevalent to a lot of the discussions, not only in Silicon Valley, but where the United States was in the past, right? When it was, during we all had our version of company towns for mining and railroads, etc., in the United States. And now in the 21st century, a lot of people are saying, well, exactly to your point, the large tech companies are getting there, right? I mean, in San Jose, in California, which is in Silicon Valley, that Meta is starting to think of developments, right? Same with Google and a few others. So
Hmm.
it's it's interesting. Do you think that it is? what you referred to in terms of the, let's say, the manufacturing employee culture in Asia is symptomatic of the culture per se, or is it more of the stage of development where Asia is, right? Because their level of income is rapidly increasing, right? But the differences between lower class and middle class are significant, right? So there's a greater, I don't want to say there's a greater incentive to work, but there kind of is.
It is.
Whereas in North America, we have a floor because of our social programs. Not saying that Asia does not have social programs, but they're not as developed. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, I totally, actually, I think that's exactly what it is. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely agree what you're saying is that we know that, oh, we always saying that China is so rich. There are so many rich people, so many millionaires, and then the amount of millionaires in China is like more and more. But then it is also true that that's like 1 or 2% of
Mm-hmm.
the, and I believe that the majority of the country people are still struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and then the culture itself, yes, work, encourage everybody to be ambitious, work really hard, and people hardly have time to reflect on themselves about, do I want to spend more time with my family, do I want to, what do I actually want. It's really really hard. The culture in Asia also, care more about what people think about them. you
Mm-hmm.
know China, Japan, Korea, and then Southeast Asia as well, is that you don't want to be too special
Mm-hmm.
in the, because they think that if you're the person, there's this saying in Chinese, is called 枪打出. Yeah, it means, basically means that if there is a line of birds standing together, if
Mm-hmm.
one bird sticks his head out, and that bird will be the one who gets shot. Like the culture doesn't encourage you to be, too special, and then so everyone actually kind of live under pressures of what people expect you to be.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the reason why of the great resignation and then great reshuffle is really people will spend lots of time to reflect on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
you know what do I good at? Maybe there are more potentials of me that's I'm now discovered, or there
Mm-hmm.
are other life. So that's definitely, one of the majority issues. But going back to, how is this an opportunity for companies, is that it is still, I think, even though there is such a great culture difference,
Mm-hmm.
still there are a lot of chances to find other, it actually a great chance for people to think about um, how to not rely on one supplier, how to not rely on one region. I know it is hard because not everybody could be working so hard, doing 12 hours a day, 996, right?
Yeah.
Working, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. But is it really what your company needs? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's good to be cost efficient. Yes, it is good to make more, but then it is also good to just focus on quality instead of
Mm-hmm.
the, right. And then eventually, I think, more, once there are more companies realize that, I think it will reflect on the consumer as well. I
Mm-hmm.
know that the consume has still is still in high demand. It is also true that people are willing to pay more money
Mm-hmm.
for product that is like locally sourced, just to support, local business. And so I think it's good and bad,
Mm-hmm.
or you're going to have people who is like, I don't care, I just want something cheap. But
Mm-hmm.
then there are also more and more people are aware or woke, if we
Mm-hmm.
refer to culture, is that they're willing to pay more if it's locally produced or ethically
Mm-hmm.
sourced, whatever that is.
Yeah. Um, It's very interesting what you mentioned, and I want to kind of pick on that a bit more, because I think fundamentally what we're seeing is um, the perception that economically or even culturally people and organizations stay the same is not really a truism, right? China is developing, the United States is developing, we're developing in different ways, both culturally and from a social and technological perspective. And the supply chain kind of relies on more or less stability, which is, oh, we're all aiming for the cheapest possible product or the
Mhm.
cheapestly produced product
Mhm.
versus, and not recognizing, exactly to your point, consumers, which you alluded to earlier in terms of sustainability, are looking and are varied in what their desires are, right? Where do you think startups, particularly in the supply chain, whether it's in the production or the management of the supply chain, or even managing the sustainability, will have the most impact in terms of addressing some of these challenges in the supply chain?
Um, Sorry, just want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah.
Like, you're are you asking where do people on the supply chain to sorry,
It's
can
okay. Let me simplify. I mean, what I'm asking is, where do you think startups can have the most impact in terms of addressing the varying challenges and issues and opportunities in supply chain? Is it, you kind of alluded to as an example, maybe it's not just from one single geographic area that you want your production. It might be multiple areas. But on the
yeah.
flip side, also, could a startup help in terms of managing the sustainability of a product or providing information? So kind of curious what you've seen based on your experience in terms of where startups, do you think in the next 3 to 5 years will make the greatest impact in supply chain?
Yes, I think is because when there is a demand and then there is a supply, right? So of course, being the demand, meaning the the brand developers who are looking for these products, they
Hmm.
a significant role on making sure to help with the supply chain crisis and also the sustainability. For example, um, we are doing personal hygiene products, right? When there
Hmm.
it's disposable products, it comes to the problem of sustainability. So the key here is to always look for new materials that that could help, like composable, biodegradable, things like that, right? But then the suppliers will not make them if it's not making money for them, because it's not
Hmm.
for their business, right? So that's when here comes with the brand developer is, for example, one day I use a straw. The straw is agave. I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool.
Hmm.
Way better than paper. It doesn't melt, and then it's very solid and it's compostable. How could I expand from this thing,
Hmm.
right? So I would go look for the supplier of this, and then look for the supplier who makes the agave straws, and then ask them and show them a picture of tampon applicator. I was like, do you think your machine can make this looks like this? Because they're
Hmm.
kind of similar. And then hmm, okay, it might be able to. We've never made tampon applicator before, but they both look like tubes. There is a chance it could work. Here is I can connect you with this person, or maybe these two technicians talk, and
Hmm.
then and this thing happened. This thing would start to happen.
Hmm.
So definitely, as a brand developer, here is what I do: is that instead of only developing, uh, looking for what consumer needs,
Hmm.
also to create a demand. That sounds bad, but it is also true that to create a demand that for more sustainable products as well, is that when there is such a thing happens, it's disposable, it's composable, it's blah blah blah, and all that, and the consumer is like, oh my God, I don't even know that I have that option. Don't know that. They thought that, oh, I have to compromise either to be using reusable or or use disposable and then feel bad about using disposable. No, you don't have to. That's what we do, is to make, always create new and better solutions to help with that. And then after that, that's just the material, right? And then
Yeah.
in terms of sourcing suppliers, it's also the same. And I really, really agree with what you just mentioned earlier about the stability. Is that even if I get a cheap product from this place, if it's not stable, sometimes the price goes rocket high, sometimes it's low, sometimes it stops reducing. It's not good anyways. Your consumer is always going to look for other solutions if they can buy yours.
Yeah.
So it's for brands anyways. So that's why I would rather to go for somewhere locally or closer. That might be more expensive, but maybe we'll negotiate and then figure out another solution that is more stable for us. Yeah, and even for companies in Asia, they themselves are looking for other solutions. Like I know so many, definitely a lot of the factories there, they were trying to create facilities out of Asia, so that to try to bridge the gap of overly leaning on one country or one region.
You kind of hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of companies are starting to recognize that their supply chains need to be a lot more flexible, because as for instance in China, or even that cost, the standard of living increases, we have to acknowledge that means manufacturing costs will go up. So we may have to go to alternatives, right? So it's either recognizing that it's constant, or you're going to have to keep constantly moving around, or to your point, I kind of like what you said. It's like, let's build sustainable manufacturing locally, if that's the target market we want, right? Let's create the demand, or create the demand for the local manufacturer, like with agave, as in your example, in order to build that up and sustain it. It brings up an interesting point. Do you think that supply chains, the constraints that we're seeing right now, do you think it will disappear? Let me restate the question. Do you think the supply chain constraints that we're seeing now will disappear, but do you think the underlying issues will remain, or will they get fixed as people pay more attention to supply chain and logistics?
I'm not confident on it just being fixed, because the problem has been there for over a decade, I would say. It's just not obvious until recently because of COVID, a string that pulls out all the problem that has been there. But it's definitely will be improving, I will say, because it is true that the culture is changing. In China, there are the 996 culture, which 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. But then it's also that people are starting to be a little more awake. That some of I don't want to work so hard anymore. I don't want to leave to work. I want to work to leave. Other cultures does. That. So it is also true. So the problem will not be 100% fixed in maybe the next 5 to 10 years, but in long, I'll see it getting better and better and better, and eventually having multiple source, or more diverse source of manufacturing eventually will happen. I could see it from happening, because the consumers, and then also a great the creations by the brand developers as well. Yeah.
It's interesting. Do you think there's anything that individuals themselves or organizations can do to kind of accelerate that improvement in the supply chain and logistics field? Is there anything that we can do?
I think yes. I mean, for investors,
Hmm.
example, I'm seeing a lot of brands, they are expanding their SKUs into product that's already existing because they need to bring the number up for the
Hmm.
invest. I think that is kind of, I think it's kind of sad as a brand developer to see it, because it seems like they are it seems like they are a little impatient
Hmm.
on focusing on something that can bring in real impact. They It seems like the numbers of sales and the money you're making in short term, how
Hmm.
much how much value you can hit before you exit in
Hmm.
the 3 to 5 years. And it seems like those kind of things matters more, uh, instead of long term how this thing will help. So that would be hard. That would be one of the major thing to that need to be fixed to accelerate, um, you know, problems like this.
That's an interesting thought and another cultural discussion, that's for sure. Well,
Yeah.
we're almost at the end of time. So, Zelen, any final questions or thoughts for our podcast listeners?
I would say that if for startups or brand developers, I would say that now it is definitely a challenging time if you're doing CPG, because
Mhm.
I'm CPG, right?
Mhm.
And it is a challenge to see who stands up to the end,
Mhm.
and just hang in there, and then whoever lasts to the end would win. I
Mhm.
think that's what is happening right now. And then a smaller business, if you're not able to hold on to there, it will be the bigger corporations that takes over. That's
Mhm.
what in happening. So that's why, I would encourage everybody to to fight back and work as hard as they could, and then focus on what you're good at, and in long term eventually you're gonna win, because consumers see what's actually good, and they eventually will choose what they actually want, what's actually making their life better. So so I will say that don't be too uh, I'm always try to be optimistic as much as possible, and that's what has been keeping us going. And then I think that's what everybody should be doing as well. There are a lots of opportunities there. We just need to, in long term, to hang in there to eventually succeed.
Hmm. I think those are wise words, particularly in these times that are so unpredictable, I think is a nice optimistic way of putting it. So, Xiaolin, thank you very much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me.